Hello Nippies, welcome back to the channel, and if you're new here, hi, hello, I'm Nips, a freelance artist, and today we're going to be working on some mini postcards for some store orders. I opened a few limited slots for the launch of my new stickers a while back, but I still have a couple available, and here they are, so go check them out in my store down below if you guys like them. I usually open these art slots when launching new merch because it's really nice to offer some pieces to customers. When making these, you get to pick what you'd like drawn, and I then doodle them all out like a themed set. Having on the themed because that's something I struggled pretty heavily with these, so we'll get there later. One of the things I do want to mention with this video is you'll see here that I start filming kind of at a sideways angle, and it's not just here, but also when I work on the sketches. And that's something I didn't know was going to be really annoying until later because I thought it was fine when I set the camera. I was like, ooh, this is a nice aesthetic. People are going to like it. It's going to look nice and cinematic. And then when I started editing the video, I was like, this is indeed not very cinematic or aesthetic. And I remember that I did this for another set of traditional art pieces and somebody really complained about it, and I could see how annoying it was once I revisited it. And like I said, I really did not think this was going to be like that, and so I am so sorry in advance. I really did try to make these as short as possible while still showing you the process, so we did kind of a supercut instead of a speed up version. So that is how some of these pieces are going to be. Tried to make them as short as possible so you don't have to endure as much of it, but hopefully you can stick with me through these and just bear it with me. So, on to the actual commentary. The first thing I like to do with these is start with the thumbnails, and I cannot stress enough how important it is to have thumbnails for your work. I think this is something when I started drawing that I really underestimated. I was like, I don't need thumbnails. I know what I'm drawing. I know what it's going to look like. And even though I know what it's going to look like nowadays, I do still try to not only do a quick sketch of what I believe it's going to look like, but even try out different variations, because you'll be surprised how different variations can really expand your thought process and your vision, especially for the original vision. I've gotten a lot of inspiration from some of the variations for the original piece, and just there's always room for improvement, so it's really nice to just keep your mind open. Which kind of segues into my next point, which is you kind of have to remain flexible with these, because once you translate them to actual size, you'll notice that there's a lot of change in composition, in amount of detail, because these are just really tiny doodles. So staying flexible, not just with that, but also knowing that the flow may also be different, because as we know, sometimes the sketch just looks better than the line art. So these are all things to keep in mind when you move on to your next steps. And here we have the finished products. I absolutely love how these came out. I'm always excited to get these onto the actual paper and start seeing them come to life. But before we do that, let's talk about our regular sponsor here, Sakurako and Tokyo Treat. They're monthly subscription boxes that come with delicious Japanese snacks straight from Japan to your door. Each box has its unique theme. Tokyo Treat is about fun pop culture snacks, whereas Sakurako focuses more on the traditional Japanese artisanal experience. They also have their own monthly themes. Here I have the January New Year's ones. Both boxes come with their own booklets that list all the goodies included, with a small description for each, and a list of its allergens, which is just so thoughtful. Not only that, but they also provide you with snippets of related Japanese culture and history, so it's yummy and educational. And if you weren't already impressed with the quality, let me talk to you about the quantity, because they've really jam-packed these boxes with so much. Sometimes they give you multiples of something too if it's really small, so you can enjoy it more than once. Just look at all these goodies. And they're all so different and delicious, so you're really getting a wide range of yummy flavors. I've had the honor and pleasure of being with them for months, and they're seriously one of my absolute favorite sponsors because, well, I do love snacks, but also the quality of their products and the love that they put into them is just unmatched. So if you'd like to get your own boxes, you can use code NIPS or the links down below for a discount. I seriously recommend them, and not just because I'm sponsored. So thank you again to Sakurako and Tokyo Treat for sponsoring this video. And now back to drawing. The next step that I like to do is to set up the actual postcards. I have some cold press watercolor paper that I basically use for any fancy traditional piece that I have to do. And some of you might be wondering, well, why don't you just make these first, cut them out, and then trace a frame in your sketchbook and work on the thumbnails like that, especially since these are so small. And to those people, I would say that is what we're going to do next. So I'll cover that then. And here you'll see me use a paper because I don't have a ruler on me at the moment, so a little bit scuffed. And we have these really nice corner cutters that just make every piece at this size look so neat and fancy. Here we have us actually creating a frame, and I use these little square kind of post-it notes that I have lying around, and I have so many of them, so these really come in handy, and the paper is not fancy at all, so it feels really nice to kind of create these disposable sketches on them. We're getting into the sideways angle I was telling you guys about earlier, so I am sorry again. However, I do start editing towards the end of these and I realize the angle situation, so I do change it. Worry not. For this part, I really love making use of my little blender stick, and that's because it allows me to kind of get an idea of where the shadows are going to be, the depth, and how more or less my piece is going to look towards the end. Every single step is about just getting closer and closer to the vision in your head. You'll see that I'm still not adding too many details, but it's definitely still more than the thumbnails, just enough to get a good idea of the composition and where the details will be. There are some people that would prefer to add even more details here rather than in the next steps, but personally, I like to keep this stage loose because it is a big transition to go from thumbnail to this part, and so I want to keep the transitions between stages as smooth as possible, and jumping from thumbnail to detailed sketch is a little too big of a jump for me, so I need baby steps. And because of that, this is probably one of my favorite stages because as a perfectionist, I really need to let loose and stop nitpicking everything. So it's really fun to just inject that confidence and flow into my lines because I really don't have to worry about anything else. However, I do just like to keep a tiny note in mind that the flow that I have here needs to translate and continue on throughout the secondary sketch and the line art. And so as I'm drawing here, I'm trying to simplify the shapes in a way that will make it easier to follow from one step to another. Usually that means just focusing on big shapes and a few amount of lines that are slightly more intentional. And I say that, but to be human is to err. And so sometimes these sketches just do not come out the way I want them to. And as we do sometimes as artists, that is a problem for future nips. I talked about this in my more recent video about how I create the chapters of my webcomic, which is to just maintain momentum. And a lot of the times I prefer to just move on because the more I try to struggle and I grapple with something, I just continue to fall and it gets harder and harder to get up. And that continuous failure, so to speak, makes it really discouraging and it makes me just not want to keep drawing. So sometimes it is better to just put something down and come back to it with fresh eyes. Overall, I'm still pretty happy with how these came out. I tend to have like future vision which is I can pretty much see how something is going to look finished. Obviously, it's not perfect, but I have a pretty good general idea of the end product. And so even if I'm not currently too happy with the sketch, I kind of have a lot of faith and maybe too much copium that it'll look better later. This next part is really fun because I get to use Lightbox, which is just that, a box of light. And the one I'm using here, I'm pretty sure I have in my Amazon storefront. So if you guys want to check that out, it's down below. But it makes it really easy to trace things. So I'll take the final postcards that we cut, and using painter's tape, I will paste them onto the sketches we just did. I'm not going to show you all of these because this part is essentially a very simplified version of the last one, but I will take my favorite colored lead, which I also have in my Amazon shop, and trace the general flow, composition, and lines. And we're finally on our final paper. Here they are side by side, and here are the finished products. You'll see that, of course, they have more detail. I try to add more and more as the steps progress. I absolutely love how they look in the stage. They're like the blue detailed lines just really scratch an itch in my brain. Now, this next part, I am going to speed it up instead of supercut it because I have a couple of hours on this and it was going to be very difficult to supercut. So hopefully it's not a little too harsh on the eyes. The next step for these is going to be the line art, and I say for these because this is something that I don't normally do with my traditional pieces. After the color pencil, I usually go in with a very, very thin lead pencil to refine even more before I go into the line art. But these were supposed to be doodles, and I kind of went too far, and so after spending this much time on them, I decided to just cut a step to stay on track. At this point, I want to talk about what I mentioned earlier at the beginning of the video, which is what I struggled with, and that is the theme of these postcards. When I do these, especially in batches, what I like to do is theme them all together so they look like they are part of a set. And that usually requires planning ahead of time what is going to unify these pieces. Usually for me, that means coloring. And you can see here that I've decided to leave the lines and then add a splash of color for each one. And I start to run into a problem where some of the pieces look awkward with certain splashes of color in only certain parts. And it starts to get a little messy and diluted because I didn't plan properly which colors I'll be using specifically for each piece. And normally I try to limit my color palette to around 3 colors and add on top highlights and darks. But here I decided to just let the piece and the character on the postcard decide what color I was going to put. Which of course leads me to have way too many options. And if I don't carefully place my colors, the cards are not going to look like they belong together. And as the postcards went on, I started panicking because the splashes of color were starting to look very messy and things just did not look finished. And sometimes I run into this problem. I'm not sure if anybody has experienced this, but if you're picking unnatural colors, so to speak, for what you're drawing, it's much easier to get it to look aesthetic rather than putting splashes of color where the color would normally be. So for example, Effie, as you just saw, does have red lipstick and red eyes in her original character design. And so I decided it would be a good idea to splash the color red. However, as I go on trying to find appropriate colors in each piece, some of the locations of those colors don't really make it look aesthetic and nice because the locations are not ideal for the composition. And so I start to corner myself with these decisions that I'm making on the spot. And for that reason, you'll see that I actually did not film a lot of the color portion of this, if at all, because I get extremely discouraged. I really like how the lines came out, but as soon as I start splashing some of the color, I just have a complete and utter meltdown. I cannot explain to you how much I cried when I made these because I just felt like I ruined them all with the colors that I added. There are a few select pieces that I really liked. For example, the Saskia as Aphrodite, this Anya piece with the dangos, the Anya with the yellow in the back, the Nidalee, kind of. I might have added too much color to that one. But there were some that I liked and some I was just so disappointed that I ruined with my poor planning. And I, like I said, tend to be a perfectionist, and so I like to overplan things. And it's not always a good thing. So sometimes I do try to just kind of trust my gut and trust the process and just go with the flow. And unfortunately, sometimes you do have to pay the consequences of not preparing adequately, and it doesn't always go well. And so you'll see the results of that here. I will show you obviously the finished products, and maybe you'll see a hint of what I'm talking about with my disappointment. But if there is anything that I would like you guys to take away from this video is to not be so hard on yourself. Every experience you have with art is a learning one, and you can always take it into your next pieces and try to enjoy the process. Don't just so hard focus on the final product that you deprive yourself of any joy of creating in the first place. So with that being said, I did really enjoy making these and I learned a lot, and I also haven't made them in a while because I usually only do them when I drop merch, and since moving to Serbia, I haven't really done that because e-commerce here is pretty difficult, and I'm still trying to figure it out because there's so many art ideas I'd like to drop, so stay tuned for that. But for now, the stickers are still available in my shop if you want to check them out down below. And also my Patreon, which I've recently reopened. So thank you everybody there supporting. I provide sketch requests every month, safe for work and not safe for work. A look into my sketchbooks before I release or post anything. I do video processes. I also do monthly art reviews if you'd like me to look at your work and give you some input. And I also show you general works in progress and behind the scenes content of my 18+ webcomic OFFcell, which you can read down below. And of course, thank you again to Tokyo Tree and Sakurako for sponsoring this video. Of course, their links are also down below. So thank you again for watching, and I will see you guys next video. Bye!